Welcome to Cultimatum, the culture of cults, a podcast dedicated to supporting survivors of cults and human trafficking. This show is hosted by myself, Anonymous Andrew.
And my name is Melody. I'm going to be Andrew's co-host. I'm also a cult survivor myself from a cult called the House of Yahweh. I am a cult advocate and creator and administrator of a cult support group on Facebook called Cult Escape and Recovery. For guests on our show, we do want them to understand that we respect privacy concerns. You can always remain anonymous or use a fake name.
And Melody, this is a safe haven for those who have been in a cult, survived, and escaped, and are now on a journey of recovery, trying to put their life back together. So join us as we learn together about the culture of cults.
And Andrew, we also want to add a trigger warning that some episodes may contain explicit subjects including sex abuse, rape, human trafficking, suicide, and other potentially disturbing topics.
Welcome to Cultimatum, the culture of cults. My name is Anonymous Andrew, and hello, Melody.
Hi, Andrew. Today we have a guest named Cherie, who is an ex-member of and a survivor of a cult called the Worldwide Church of God. It actually recently, well, I'm going to say recently, loosely, I guess in the early 2000s, sometimes they changed their name to the Grace Communion International. But it is a group that it was created by a man named Herbert W. Armstrong. And the religion or the cult is sometimes referred to as Armstrongism. So any of those, and they have offshoots too, because splinter groups from differences of belief, they'll go off and create their own group because one thinks you should or shouldn't do this. But Cherie's story I relate to a lot because my dad was looking into the Worldwide Church of God before we joined the House of Yahweh, and so they have a lot of similar teachings. They teach that the Sabbath is on Saturday. They don't celebrate any of the holidays or birthdays. They teach the first, second, and third tithes. They don't believe in the Trinity. They believe in the apocalypse, the end of the world teaching, which a lot of religious cults especially do.
What she in the interview, Cherie mentions is it tithes? Tides?
Tithes. Tithe. Tithe, like tithing.
Okay.
Yep. Tithe.
Okay,
tithing.
Gotcha. Yeah,
and a lot of the Old Testament
as a non-cult person, I don't know these.
Yes, they teach a lot of the Old Testament laws, the 613 laws, which is where the feasts come from, the celebrating the feast, which that the Worldwide Church of God also teaches the Feast of Tabernacles, Passover, and Pentecost. And then also the food laws of not eating pork or seafood. So,
wow.
Yeah. So very interesting. So let's have Cherie take
let's
over
hear from Cherie.
and let's listen to the interview.
And we'll talk on the other side.
Yep, absolutely.
Welcome to Cultimatum, the culture of cults. And hello, Melody.
Hi, Andrew. How are you today?
I'm doing well. And who do we have on today's show?
We have got a guest. Her name is Cherie. She is an ex-member of the Worldwide Church of God, or what is now called the Grace Communion International. I've also heard it referred to as Armstrongism, which is a cult that some people may be familiar with because it is one of those ones that is kind of out there. They've got a lot of branches, and as Cherie was saying earlier, and she'll explain that a little bit, but they've splintered. There's lots of different branches of it. Cherie,
welcome. First, welcome.
Yes, welcome, Cherie. Yes. Cherie is also the administrator and I believe creator of the Facebook support group called Cult Survivors from Worldwide Church of God and their offshoots.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that. And now, Cherie, welcome to the show, and we're looking forward to hearing your story.
All right, great.
So start wherever you want to start. When did you join, or how did you get involved? Or
Okay, so actually, I was born and raised in the Worldwide Church of God. My parents, they had met in one of the Feast of Tabernacles sites, was from what I understood. So my parents, my dad and my mother, they came from Christian. They grew up in Christian homes. Nothing Worldwide Church of God. I didn't have any other family members besides my mom and dad and my brother. Everybody else, just didn't get involved in it. But so pretty much I was born and raised. I was born in it in 1979. That was the times where, I mean, you couldn't, anything you did, if it was wrong, you were going to Lake of Fire. No medical care. Although I was born in a hospital, my brother and I, so I didn't quite understand how it was okay for a woman to give birth in a hospital, but then you weren't allowed to seek medical care. I didn't quite understand that. But, Friday night, Saturday, it's the Sabbath, can't do anything, outside the Sabbath. No, school activities. And, growing up, I know most places, a lot of the school activities, middle school, high school, is usually on Friday nights and Saturdays.
Yep.
So growing up, I missed out on a lot of that. So it kind of felt a little bit like a sheltered life, especially when you didn't have any family members in it. It was just you, and that was your life. You go to church on Saturdays, and everybody, there is it. That's pretty much your world.
I assume,
Okay.
Cherie, that like my religion, my cult, I'm going to say, not my religion because I don't identify with it anymore, but Sabbath begins Friday night at sundown and goes through Saturday night at sundown. Is that what Worldwide Church to God also
Correct.
teaches?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So, and sometimes they'd have, for children and teenagers, they had some youth activities. Sometimes they'll have sports, where you play sports, basketball, volleyball teams with other church kids within, the area. Like where I lived in Southeast Florida, they had Miami, they had West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and, South Florida's grown over the years. So within like a 60-mile radius, they had, 5 or 6 congregations. So there was a lot of children where I lived and grew up with. But that was pretty much my world. And so as a teenager, you get older and you can't really do anything with your friends. I ended up going into, supposed to be homeschool, but I had a mentally ill mother on top of that. Didn't want to get any care. At that time you were allowed to get medical care, but that's a long story. I'm not going to really get into my mother's issue with it.
Right.
But my dad stayed in the marriage because that was another thing with Worldwide Church of God. Divorce wasn't allowed. So if you had an abusive spouse, you had to stay in the marriage because that's one of the biblical things. You stay married, divorce. So my brother and I grew up, very, like I said, to me, I felt like it was sheltered. You really couldn't get into the world to see what it's like to really live. And then once I was 18, I took a GED because I turned 18 in February. And then I wanted to get out of my house. I wanted to see what life was really like to live. I had a lot of questions about the beliefs and stuff. And, it's like either you agree with it or you're pretty much you're disfellowshipped. This is what it is. This is what it says. If you disagree, they would disfellowship you. You had to pay your tithes, 10%. And then I think it was every third year, it was another 10% for helping, supposedly supposed to help
The orphans and widows.
take care of people that are.
Oh.
Yes, yeah.
Did you not have the second tithe that was supposed to be used for the feast?
For the second tithe was for the feast, I think.
Okay.
I'll
So
have to
that,
check
yeah,
on
that's
that.
all in line with the house of Yahweh.
Yeah, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So it hurt a lot of those people financially. They brainwashed you to the point to where if you don't do everything to the T in the Bible, you're going to go to the lake of fire. The cult leader, Herbert W. Armstrong, was, he made it out to be like he was the prophet. He was pretty much he was almost God. Like, God tells, trying to think of how to really explain it. God speaks through me, through you. So, if you don't do what I say, pretty much you're going to go like fire, you're disfellowshipped. It was Worldwide Church of God was the only true church, Christians that were going to be saved. Everybody else in the world, every other religion, Catholicism, Judaism, whatever, they were all going to hell. Like, this was it. This is God's one true church. So I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it.
You're doing good.
Well, let me ask you. Let me ask you this: you referred to the lake of fire twice. Is that their version, their euphemism for hell?
I think that's their euphemism from hell is what I understood it as always.
Melody, did you hear? Was that
It's
used?
actually in the Bible, and the House of Yahweh used the lake of fire too. That was our threat too.
Okay.
the burning in the lake of fire. Basically, you are burning eternally. Is the idea of what hell is to them?
Yeah. They also believed, if I'm correct, like when you die, you don't have a spirit that goes to heaven or hell. Like you're died, you're buried, you're asleep. Nothing happens to your soul.
Until the second resurrection.
Yeah. So
I think Israel Hawkins stole a lot from the Worldwide Church of God.
You know what? I left in 1997 or 98. I know in the mid 90s, Herbert W. Armstrong, I think he died somewhere like 1985, 86. I don't remember. I just know it was sometime in the 80s. I was really young. And then Joseph Tkach is his name, senior. His son, I believe now actually is the main one right now. But after he took over, things over the years started to change. They made things a lot more lax. And then the mid 90s was when it became real quick. And then, of course, because of all the changes, you've got some that, didn't agree with all of it. Hey, like I've heard they've had, now there's like thousands, but I know there was just a few main ones when I left. They have Philadelphia Church of God, which is like the main one that's still to the T of the old Herbert W. Armstrong, the way they do everything. And then there's the Living Church of God. They had United Church of God. There's another one I was familiar with. I can't remember the name of it. But there was about 4 or 5 ones that I know were there in the late 90s. But since then, they've had splinters off of those as well. But they all pretty much stem from Armstrongism. But Worldwide Church of God was the main one culprit.
So what you back in the beginning of your story, you said that you were born in a hospital, and so therefore your parents were already in this church.
Right.
How long have they been in it? And are you your brother is older or younger than you? My
brother is younger than me. They had met at one of the Feast of Tabernacle sites. That was all I know. But they went through some terrible times. And I think that's what I noticed a lot of the Worldwide Church of God people that are brought into it. They were going through some major changes or some trauma in their lives. I know that my dad he was previously married, had a divorce, and it was right around that time that he joined Worldwide Church of God. My mother came from an abusive childhood as well. And I guess they met through their friends and then they got involved in it. But it seemed to me from what I've learned from my the people that I have in my Facebook group, a lot of those adults, the ones that were not born into it, were attracted to it because of something major going on in their life. Like this is their only correct way to get to God or something.
Well, most cults look for some type of vulnerability, and then they take advantage of that, and they use that to kind of provide answers for you. I mean, even Twin Flames Universe provided that we can provide you with your twin flame or your one true love. And when it's a religious void, then they fill that. They take whatever it is they think you're lacking, and they.
So was there a recruitment committee that would seek out people that were vulnerable, or
Well, I
how
don't
did they
know.
attract?
That I really don't know. My parents never really talked about that. A lot of this stuff, like, the ones that got them interested, I didn't really learn until, like I said, until I opened my Facebook group. But there's some that were already, born and raised in it. That's all we knew. But me, I mean, it was just, I had nobody else. It was just my mom and dad, my brother and I. No other family members. Didn't, I mean, my family lived out of state anyway. So I really didn't have any aunts, uncles, cousins that lived nearby to really know, what my brother and I were growing up in.
Right.
And grandparents?
Same thing with grandparents. No, I mean, we were the only, four of us were the only
You
ones.
were isolated, very
Yeah.
isolated. Yeah.
Pretty
Now,
much.
I do know, just because my dad started with the Worldwide Church of God before going to the House of Yahweh, they did have literature and propaganda, because I saw literature and propaganda that my dad was getting. Where he found that or how he got on their mailing list, that I don't know. But I do know they had
Yeah.
like booklets and pamphlets they would mail out.
And they had on, I think I was real young. They had Herbert W. Armstrong had a broadcast. I think it was on Sundays, maybe. I think it was Sunday mornings. He had a broadcast
Wasn't it on the radio?
on TV.
Oh, on TV. Okay.
Yeah, there was The World Tomorrow. There was one broadcast and I was real young. I remember them watching. Herbert
Okay.
W.
That may
Armstrong.
have been where my dad saw it or heard about it then.
Although I think he did start out as the Radio Church of God back in the 1940s or 50s.
Okay.
From what that was the very beginning of it, Herbert W. Armstrong, and I think maybe the 60s and 70s, or maybe the 60s is where they started having churches and stuff like that.
Can I ask what state this was based in?
The headquarters was in Pasadena, California.
Okay.
But the churches were all over the country, all over the world. It was like a business organization. You had your ministers, you had your local elders, you had in every church, everywhere. So anywhere you go in the country, they're there, just like churches of any denomination. They're around everywhere you go. One of the things for years, the cross was forbidden. Whenever we'd have services, it was usually a building that was rented out, maybe in a hotel, or I know in mine, they actually had their services in schools, like not a cafeteria was at one, but, how a lot of the schools will have where they do performances, the auditoriums, that's where they would have their services.
So there was no church?
There was no church building
Right.
anywhere. They always rented out because for years, I think it was the early 90s, the cross was forbidden. Like Jesus wasn't crucified on the cross. He was crucified, but it wasn't on the cross. And because all these other churches are pagan, and the cross, they use the cross because it's pagan, I guess that, it was forbidden.
But I'm just naturally curious. You could still build a building without a cross. I know when you see a church, you usually see a cross at the top, which tells you that this is a church.
Right.
Was it exclusive to your church that you didn't have a church, or all around the world they do this?
All around the world. Headquarters was in, Pasadena. There was no
Maybe they saved money that way.
I was just thinking that. I was just...
Yeah, exactly. All the money, all those tithes that you had to pay, while you've got some people that were so poor, some went without food, lost power.
Just thinking that. No rent or no taxes, or of course they don't pay taxes. No maintenance or upkeep of the grounds. So
Right.
if they held services at a hall or a church, did they have to lease it or pay for it?
You know what? I never asked. I guess where I grew up, it was usually in the schools. That's what they would. I mean, a lot of the schools have, auditoriums,
Right.
cafeterias where they can, they have all those chairs, all those seats already there. I would imagine maybe, but I'm not really sure.
Okay, now
That
I
I
have a
never asked. I
question,
just know
Sherry,
they
and
don't
this
have it
is
in the building.
based on my experience and what I know. Where and how did they keep the feast? Because a service is one thing, but a feast, you got to stay there for 8 days.
Right, right. Well, people had to stay in hotels or whatever they could afford. They had those big arenas and stuff like that. Like
Okay.
where I live, they had in Florida, there was one in Daytona Beach, St. Petersburg, and Pensacola,
And they would
and
just rent that out for the
they
feast.
had really big arenas. Thousands of
Mm,
people. They would do it in big buildings like that, depending on where in
okay.
the country it is. People would stay in hotels or whatever they can afford. That was one thing I never understood. I'm like, all these people that can barely afford to buy food, pay rent, how are they doing it? Somehow they did it. I don't
Yeah.
know. It broke my heart too. That just on that Facebook group, seeing some of these stories. It's a lot of them. I mean, we all had our own bad experience in our own ways. It's affected all of us, but some worse than others, and it just broke my heart. I'm like, man, I should be thankful that I didn't have it that bad, but it still has an effect on you
It
in
does.
life. Just,
And I
um,
assume that's why you started the
but
Facebook group.
well, yeah, and that was the thing too. I'm like, what God would, Herbert W. Armstrong, the way he was. I'm thinking, what kind of God, who's supposedly a loving God, would allow that to happen? Allow him to treat people like that. They had it. Herbert W. Armstrong had them so brainwashed to believe that, if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell or lake of fire.
Right.
Um, that they would get to that point to where they just almost would end up on the streets. I could not believe it. And
So
then
there was a lot of poverty.
yes, there was. It was more than I think than we what I saw. Just there's what you see, and then there's behind the curtains that you don't see either. And till you get older, I guess, and really start to understand how it is to live. And I'm just thinking, how do they do that? um,
So
So,
walk us through some of the, I guess, the rules, like in some of the other stories that we've already listened to or heard, like how you had to dress. Um, you said you didn't go to school; you were homeschooled.
my last couple years of high school, yes, I was. And like I said, I really couldn't do anything school activity wise. You can't
Joined the
go do
chess
anything.
club.
Well, it's like, what's the point? What's the point? If you can't go to your concerts or you can't, I mean, I loved band in middle school. But then get to high school, you have all those activities Friday nights and Saturdays. So if you can't, I mean, why? You're
So
not
no
going to be able,
prom.
no prom, no, I just, I had to get out of my house. I was homeschooled. And then when I turned 18, I just got my GED. Just getting out of my house and away from all that was more important to me than walking down the aisle. Like that's how much this mentally affected me. Um,
Is that when you, I guess, technically left?
yeah,
It's- yeah,
you just
it
kind of
was when you
aged
turned
out.
18.
yeah, amongst some other issues at home with my dad and stepmom were, they, they finally got it in their brains that they needed to leave their spouses, abusive spouses, mentally
Mm.
ill. And anyway, so I pretty much told them that I'm not going back. I'm not
Uh,
going back to church. That was it. I'm 18. I got a roommate finally and moved out with her. And I felt, and that was the thing too, because that's all I knew my whole life. All of a sudden, I'm not there anymore. I'm not with those people that pretty much were your whole life. anymore. You're out on your own and you feel lost. You have a job and stuff like that. You get to know people a little bit, but you feel lost. Like you're different from this world. You didn't have normal activities in this world. And, so it was hard. I've got anxiety issues. You're always, am I doing this correctly? How do you do this? How do you do that? That was the other thing too, growing up. Spanking was in the Bible, spare the rod, spoil the child. So because of that, they all have it in their brains. That means to hit your kids, spank your kids, beat your kids, whatever. And when you do that, I mean, not just, church-wise, but all the research shows how that can mess you up right there.
Yep.
Anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
But that on top of, growing up sheltered pretty much had its mental effects on me. And I just can't, what I did learn from it was how not to treat your kids. But I'm still going through the therapy of dealing with that and growing up, in the cults. And it's going to take years. I know that, to get through it, but I'm working through it as much as I can. So
no TV in the house.
That's exactly what I was going to ask. Did they control that? Did they control information?
No, Friday nights or Saturday TV.
Right.
Pretty much sunset Friday night to sunset Saturday night. It's just nothing. You can't do anything except go to church.
Or read the Bible.
Can't talk to anybody on the phone.
Or listen to Bible
nothing.
songs. Or yes.
Yes. That was the other thing. Children were to be seen, not heard. One of it was, like I said, spanking children. It just made you very fearful of everything, I think is what it did to those kids. Some worse than others had it. The medical thing with not being able to seek medical care, there's people I know that have permanent, medical issues they have to live with the rest of their life, or some people have even died for not getting cancer treatments, stuff like that, have had family members die and they didn't have to. So to me, I mean, it was like a death sentence. You get ill, you're dead. If they're not willing to seek medical care.
They were strict on this. So like if you tripped and broke your arm.
Mm-hmm. People got appendicitis and, you couldn't, it's not like that anymore, but this was years ago, and people have permanent medical, issues and it didn't have to happen had they seek the medical treatment.
Right.
Or how many people died, because they were told they couldn't seek medical treatment. So to me, that makes him a murderer in my eyes.
Yeah. I agree. Do you know what other teachings they changed when they changed the name to the Grace Communion International? Do you know what other things they started laxing on teaching-wise?
They changed the name sometime in the 2000s. This was way after I left. The medical thing, when I was real young, I did. I know we couldn't get vaccines and stuff like that either. The late 80s, I do remember going to the doctor if need be, or the emergency room, not really like doctor visit. But I think mainly that was the 70s and 80s. Early 80s, maybe they did allow you to seek medical care. I think it just kind of depended on what area, too, you were in. Some ministers were saying you can't, and you have some that say you can. But
I remember, because I was born in 1960, so I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s and hearing about certain religions. You would even see some television shows where the child was sick and was brought to the hospital against the parents' will, and the parents would say, no, you can't treat my child. And there were sometimes the law got involved. There was I don't think it was maybe your cult or religion, but there were stories that I heard that the court had to intervene legally, and I just remember that. So I'm wondering if that, when they started to ease up on that, was it maybe pressure from society or the government or?
That I'm not really sure about. I think a lot of this started to happen. It happened real fast. I know when they started making changes in the late 90s, but um, a lot of Herbert W. Armstrong passed sometime in the early mid 80s. I'd have to look at it, maybe 85-ish, 84, 85. And it was right around that time and before where they were very,
So
like,
he
can't
was
see
the
justice.
founder.
Right, right.
So
Okay.
there may have been lawsuits or potential lawsuits or, something that scared them. I would guess. I would have to do some research on that to confirm, but that would be my guess is that there was some sort of financial threat to them that they eased on that teaching. That would
Yeah.
be my best guess.
Well, if there were no vaccines allowed and a child got measles, mumps, what's some of the other vaccines?
Whooping cough.
If child
Yep.
got sick, whooping
Polio.
cough, and they died because of that, I would think that's just what I remember growing up. There was many, many, many stories of children dying or being prevented from being treated because of the religion that their parents were in.
Right, right. Um, and I think that may have been like my mother has mental illness, and it's I cut her out of my life a long time ago because she refuses now to get treatment. I mean, she's in a facility now, but um, that was one of the things is that if I'm correct, mental illness was looked at as more of a demonic possession, like you're
Yeah.
so years ago, my mother probably would have not been like she is now had, she had seek treatment years ago.
Right.
To me, that's one of the things where I think that's affected her, growing
Right.
up in that cult. Um, but I think the Philadelphia Church of God is one of the splinter group that is still the way Armstrong was, 40, 50 years ago.
Okay.
I'm not really sure how they are with their medical as far as seeking medical treatment. From what I understand, they are still that way. I don't know how to that extent
Yeah.
they are.
Wow.
Did they
But
have predictions of the end of the world or apocalyptic teachings when you were growing up as well?
yeah, yeah. I mean, they thought, well, for the longest time, I think Armstrong originally predicted it was 1972. It didn't happen, then it was 1975. Um,
Yeah, we heard the story. Yeah.
and then all of a sudden they said it was going to happen in 1999. Well, here we are, 23
Y2K.
years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Well,
it's always close to the end of the world, and forget about it. Just be prepared for the world to end. Don't worry about your education. Don't worry
Yep.
about, it's like, what's the point? You're not going to need it. And here you are, 20 years later.
Sounds so familiar. Did you
Yeah.
guys have to store up food and prepare that way too?
My dad did that. Yeah. Yeah, he did.
Yep.
So,
Which, as if you weren't spending enough money on all the ties, now the extra money you have is all going to store up food for the 3.5 years of tribulation for your family.
right, right. Exactly. Um,
all right. So I have to ask only for to know the progression of. So you got out at 18,
mhm.
and what was your first job, by the way? I'm curious.
Let me see. I actually worked at a fast food chain.
Oh, okay.
Did that. Yeah, it was about a year later that I did finally go to start college and everything. Wanted to get out of my house, get established and stuff like that. But I worked at fast food chain, and then I think once I started school, I had to I mean, that was a lot. I went to work at a clothing store. Can't even remember the name of the chain now anymore. That was years ago.
Probably
Um,
closed now anyway.
yeah, yeah. Hey, weekends, that's when you got to work, when you were doing retail or fast food chain, working the weekends. I broke the Sabbath, whatever. Um, but it did hurt my relationship with my parents, but
Well, that's where I was going. So when you left, they stayed, And did they, are they alive today?
My dad passed in 2015. My stepmom is still alive. I don't talk to her anymore. I haven't for years since my dad passed. Long story behind that.
But
My
was he
mother,
in the church when he passed? He
yes.
still
He
was. No
stayed
kidding.
all the way
Wow.
until
Yeah.
his death.
We lived out of state. We had our distance. We talked on the phone once in a while, but we kept the church and everything out of it. I'm like, if you bring this up, I'm hanging up the phone. Plain and simple. Um, so, but yeah, I sometimes you have to have your boundaries, and that was one thing that I had to do. You love your parents, but you have to. I left that house because I couldn't live with that anymore.
Right.
um,
So you got out, got a job, a couple of jobs. You put yourself through college,
mhm.
graduated.
I didn't. I actually didn't graduate. I think I was in college for about a couple months. Actually, I got married, and then
That was my next question.
ended
Okay.
up ended up pregnant with my first one. She's 23 now. Wouldn't I mean unplanned. Wouldn't change it for the world though. Had my other one 3 years later. I did finally once they graduated. My oldest one graduated college 2 years ago. My other one's in college, so she's got another year to go. So it felt really good to see them succeed. I have a really good relationship with them. Didn't raise them, going to church. I let them. You learn how not to treat your kids. School
Sure.
activities.
Yeah.
Just watching them do the things that I didn't get to do just brought joy to my life. Still have a close relationship with them. Didn't have that growing up. I think that really helped me a lot mentally to know that I
Broke that
I'm sorry.
cycle.
I broke that cycle. Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
But
Are you still with the father of the?
yeah, yeah, we've
Oh,
been married
oh, great.
25 years. 25.
Wow.
My parents, that
Congratulations.
was the other thing. He's not religious. He grew up in a non-religious Jewish family. That was the other thing. I just started to celebrate Christmas. We celebrate the Jewish holy days, but we're not religious. We don't go to temple every Friday or stuff like that. But
You observe the holidays.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's in his family. He's got a relationship with his family. I let them decide what they want to do, with religion and stuff. But yeah, I'm proud of my kids.
Good. And
And
are
you
your
should be
kids
proud of
religious at
yourself.
all now, by chance?
No,
Or
no,
okay.
no. They do. They in high school, I did allow them to go to church with their friends. I didn't stop them from doing that. I wanted them to make their own decision, but I keep in mind that I told them to make sure you still enjoy your life. I don't want them to think, to me, I still believe in God. I taught them God exists, stuff like that. But what you decide to believe religious wise, I leave that up to them. Um,
As it should be.
Yes,
mhm,
that's
yeah,
exactly what I did with my children, and I did feel a little lost there for a while as to exactly what I wanted to teach my kids. So, yeah, it was a struggle.
yeah, yeah. Um,
So, what are some of the things that you've done in your healing process? I assume that creating the Facebook group was part of your healing journey.
yes.
But what are some of the other things that you've done?
Well, now that my kids are, grown up, moved out of the house, I've finally started seeking therapy, but I did open that Facebook group because I knew I was like, there's no way I was the only one that was. I mean, this was
No.
2010, I believe I opened that. Um, there was no way I was the only one that had a hard childhood and was messed up from that. And I think I'm over 1,200 members or something like that now.
Oh, good. Wow.
Yeah, so I was like, wow. And it was only for that group because just like with any other cult, or religion, yeah, it all affected everybody, but the ones from that specific group, or church or whatever, would understand what you're going through more than anybody from another cult would. That was my main thing. You have a little more understanding, than if somebody from Church of Scientology would, which is
Right.
also another cult. But we would, they wouldn't understand what we went through as much as everybody, from Worldwide Church of God understands. So that was my main focus. How many more are out there that, have this pain or damage, are out there like we did. But yeah, just also having that support and, talking to people that went through what you went through, and that helped out a lot. I think just that feeling of support that you're not alone out there.
Because I went and created a Facebook group for the same. I created an ex-House of Yahweh members Facebook group before I created the Cult Escape and Recovery group for very similar reasons. I was just like, nobody can understand this like the other people who left the House of Yahweh, and it's very, very. But I think, part of the reason I joined the Worldwide Church, your group, is because I felt like there were so many similarities in the teachings that I knew that there was enough of a similarity there that I could relate on that level with you guys as well, especially since that was what my dad was looking into before we joined the House of Yahweh.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's I agree that there is something about being able to connect with people on that level that understand what you've been through because they've been there.
Right.
And I'll call myself the outsider here, and this is one of the reasons why Melody's my co-host, because she was in and is a survivor and has that perspective, so you two understand. So as a outsider looking in and listening to your story, Cherie, I see the pain that you're still in. I hear you had your childhood was stolen from you.
Yeah.
And yet you were able to get out, which you're brave, and you got married and raised two beautiful girls, two girls, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so from the outside, everything looks like you have a nice life, but I can see the pain that you're still in.
Yeah.
Yep.
And how many years has it been since you?
I left in 1998.
So we're talking 25 years.
Yeah.
And you're still, and that breaks my heart. That.
Yeah. Raising my kids was my main focus. And like I said, I learned how not to treat my kids. So I focused on raising my kids. I think also helped me a lot too. But now, because that's all pushed to the back of my mind, like with anybody with trauma, if you don't deal with it, it's going to haunt you, and now that the focus of my kids, they're out of the house, I can focus on therapy and doing my part to try to complete that healing.
It's like you put your own self healing aside to raise your children, and now 25 years later, now that they're out on their college, but you can now focus on yourself.
Right.
It's just unbelievable and I'm sorry that you're going through that. Your husband, he was not from a cult?
No. You've got people that call, they're not religious, but they, you have Catholics out there. You've got some that are religious, and some that are not. Hey, a lot of it is what you grew up in, and he grew up in a Jewish family. They celebrate the holidays and stuff like that, but they don't go to temple or anything like that, except for maybe there's a bar mitzvah or bar mitzvah, they'll have a celebration, but he never grew up like real religious.
Right.
So.
Wow.
So it was, unless you've been there, it's hard to understand.
Exactly.
Yep.
But he's been there for me.
Well,
I've had a really
that
supportive husband too, and we've
Yeah.
been married for it'll be 27 years in
Okay.
like 4 days. So
Wow.
I've had the same
Congratulations.
experience to where when I told him on our first date that I had been in a cult, and he'd known my sister for like a year, and he's like, why has your sister never mentioned this? And I'm like, I don't think she likes to talk about it. I just want you to know up front that I might have a little trauma going on because we came out of a cult. And he's been very curious in the beginning, but since then, very supportive, even of like the things that I do now, like doing the Facebook group and doing this podcast. And it does make a big difference when you have a supportive partner for healing wise.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's probably been another thing that you've had a
Yeah.
very supportive partner that's helped with your healing, I'm sure.
Yeah. My parents weren't very happy, about it. And I think mainly, again, I was at that time dating somebody that's not part of the cult. I
Right.
mean, but yeah.
I have a difficult question, and of course, as we discussed, if you don't want to answer it, but do your children have a relationship with your dad?
My dad passed away in
Oh, that's
2015.
right. Okay, but prior to that,
Prior to that, my parents live out of state. I think we saw them maybe once or twice, and when we did see them, we just didn't talk about anything with it.
Okay.
okay,
Religion wise, they just knew that we celebrated the Jewish holy days or holidays, and we did celebrate Christmas, and that I did forget that was another thing about worldwide. They didn't celebrate Christmas. Christmas trees were pagan, and
yeah,
Christmas had nothing to do with Jesus' birth. So never had that, but I brought it into my home. So
good for you. Good for you.
yeah.
I did too. It took me
Okay.
17 years after leaving, put a tree in my house. So,
Oh, really?
but I did it. Yes, it was some of the brainwashing took a little longer for me to filter it out. I mean,
Yeah.
I still believe
Yeah.
it's pagan. I just don't think it really matters. I'm
Yeah.
just like
It's pretty. If,
yeah,
for
that's
me to say
exactly.
this is weird, but it's pretty to have a Christmas tree around the
Yeah,
holidays and decorations and
I just
To
do it for the
me,
drive
pleasure.
around the neighborhood.
yeah. To me, it's not the religious part of it. Hey, the religious part is,
It's
hey, it's
festive.
supposedly yeah.
Yes.
It's more of, the Santa Claus with my kids, hey, we got a fireplace in our house, doing the Santa Claus thing. Santa's going to come through the
Good.
fireplace, getting the milk and the cookies there and
Good.
doing that part of it. Is more my thing about it, not about it being
Good.
supposedly Jesus' birthday, but um,
Yeah.
so in Halloween, having the fun of carving the jack-o'-lanterns. Didn't get to do that growing up either. So my kids every year we did it. We
So you kind of lived those childhood activities through your children as an adult,
right,
which is
right,
amazing.
right,
Yes.
exactly,
Wow.
It
exactly.
is. I give you credit because I didn't do that. My kids complain that, Mom, why'd you wait till we were teenagers until you put a tree in the house? And I'm like, I was filtering. I was still processing all this stuff. So
Yeah,
they didn't really, I mean, I think they appreciate now where I'm at, but they were like a little resentful of that. Like, what the heck, Mom? So, and my husband was kind of
yeah,
like, just let me take the reins on that kind of stuff because he knew it was hard for me. He knew I was, dealing with trauma. So, but
yeah.
that's awesome that your kids got to experience that. And I'm sure that it was like you kind of got to do it vicariously through them because yeah, that's kind of fun.
I think that really has helped me healed was being able to let them live life, that I didn't get, and let them
Yeah.
enjoy their childhood. Let them go out and on Friday nights, Saturdays, school activities on those days, go out with your friends, whatever. Seeing them do that just brought a lot of joy to my heart.
That's
Good.
amazing.
Yeah.
So, Sherry, to anybody that's listening that either is just getting out of a cult or recently got out of a cult or has family, etc., words of support or wisdom or advice as to in your own words?
It's hard to do when you don't have that family or friend support. Like I said, I didn't grow up around any family, and the family members I had out of state, nobody, grew up in Worldwide or was part of any of that. So, I mean, it was hard, my friends and my, now husband, now, when we were dating, was there, it's a lot easy. It's a lot harder trying to do it on your own. You become an adult and you've got to, just like anything in life, you're going to say you got to do it. The only thing to do is to go and do it. Sometimes just asking, you need to ask for help. And I still have a hard time with that now, asking for help. That's the way I am, but, there's so many more out there that you don't see in the situation, and you just have to do it for yourself. That was, I just went and did it. I just said, I'm not going anymore to my parents, and that was it. And I moved on. It's a lot harder if you're, a teenager, or, probably even nowadays when you're in college and you can't, live on your own. Some people live with their parents, while going through school, and it's a lot easier said than done. But I just pretty much just finally said, I'm done.
But the moral of the story is it's doable and you can
It's
do it.
doable. Yeah.
And the
you just
Facebook
have-
support group obviously helped you and could help others. I mean,
Oh.
obviously those support groups are out there now, which is something when I first got out, the internet wasn't really a thing. So that was not an option for me. So I think that's an amazing
I think that
resource
makes
that's
it-
now available.
Yeah. That's true. In the late 90s, you're right. They didn't have the internet to go and research this kind of stuff. And now with the internet, all the social media sites, you can just go and Google, how to get out of cults, or, shelters or whatever. I mean, you can just pull it up and, then give you a number to call, somebody to talk to. We didn't have that.
Even
Now.
even therapy today is you can have in the morning you could look up a therapist and have a session that afternoon virtually. And
Yes.
you spoke about not getting medical help back in the 70s and 80s, and especially with your mom. There wasn't a lot of therapy back then.
No.
I had some issues as a teenager, and my dad sent me off to a psychiatrist, but it was a huge deal. And it's not like it is today, where you can literally. I hear on other podcasts, I hear commercials for. It's almost like dial a therapist. You just go to the website and look up, and then that evening you're FaceTiming or Zooming with the therapist. And we didn't have that 30, 40 years ago.
No.
So
Well, that's the other thing too. Again, 30, 40 years ago, that cults weren't really, I shouldn't say known, but talked about,
no.
No.
And now that
They flew under the
coming out
radar.
more and more,
Yeah.
Well, and I think the internet
you're gonna
has
have a
helped
lot
with that too, because
Yeah.
if you're thinking about joining a group, you can now Google it and say, is any weird stuff going on in this? What are other people saying about this group? And I don't think that was, a thing when my dad was looking into, the Armstrongism and the House of Yahweh and all that. There wasn't the internet. He couldn't look up and see what other people's experience had been, good or bad.
Right. I think a lot of these cults back then, it was always who bringing their friends and family in, or whatever. But yeah, now you can just look it up. Hey, where do you join a cult, or what? But they're getting the abuse and all that stuff going on in cults nowadays. That's all getting exposed.
The
And-
documentaries that are
Yes.
being done on HBO, Netflix, Amazon, A&E is in on it. A&E did the whole thing with Scientology with I'm forgetting her name, Rhea.
Oh, Leah
There's
Remini.
several actors. Yeah,
Leah
there's some
Remini.
Leah
actors
Remini.
that are part of
Yep.
it. Yeah, that are in there, or were in there. I think they did an interview, a few that left. But yeah, there's just, it's hard to believe that it's been going on for so many years, hundreds of years probably.
Yeah.
But
Oh, yeah, centuries. If yeah.
yeah.
Cherie, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and I want to give you so much credit and kudos for putting your own sanity and happiness aside for your children, but now you can begin to work on yourself, whatever that journey looks like for you. And I'm
we
glad
hope
you
that
were
doing this
strong enough.
and sharing your story is part of your healing journey. We hope that this has been therapeutic for you, because sometimes, that can be a very therapeutic part. It was for me. I mean, just feeling like I wasn't being muzzled anymore.
Yeah. Well, Mel, I definitely appreciate you sharing that in my group as well. And hopefully we'll get some more of those members in the group, interested in.
Yes, and we'll certainly
being on
share
the
your
podcast, too.
episode on the group, because that will encourage them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Seeing you.
And that's our goal, is to bring
Yes.
bring more awareness, because I just don't think people, just like myself, I started another podcast about relationships and dating because I went through a bad relationship, and somebody came to me with the twin flames one 6 months ago, and now I have a podcast, Melly and I, about cults, and I am just overwhelmed with I don't even know how to call it, but shock that this is.
That there's that
I had
many
no
out
idea this
there
was
and-
going on. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Cherie. Thank you, and all the best. We
Yes,
we
thank
wish
you
you all
again,
the best.
Cherie. We appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, guys.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye. And again, we want to say thank you to Cherie for coming on the show and sharing her story and her healing journey, her process, and some of the struggles that she still has with anxiety and trying to get therapy. And I commend her for putting her children first, like Andrew had said earlier, and putting her own, I'm going to say her own healing aside to raise her children and focus on her children. And now that her children are gone, it's time for her to focus on herself and finish that healing process that obviously wasn't fully completed. But, there's always going to be still a little bit of that trauma there, I think, when you experience something like that, especially when you're born into it and you're in it for most of or all of your childhood. For her, it was really right up until adulthood.
And
what were your
Melody,
thoughts?
let me talk about emotions first.
There we go.
I mentioned this. I mentioned this in one of the other interviews, that while I was watching, I forget who it was, but while I was to the audience, we see the guest, right? So
Yes.
Again, I'm watching somebody tell their story, and I can see the uncomfortability that they're in, the body language, the expressions on their face, and I'm somewhat squirming in my chair because I'm uncomfortable for them. I feel like, oh my
Right.
goodness, and like you said, she had no childhood, and that breaks my
yes.
heart, because it's. And I'm really happy. Maybe again I'm choosing the wrong word. That we started this podcast because I'm learning about cults, but more importantly, the human aspect of what they're doing to people and
Yes.
the aftermath effect. And I had no idea. I had no clue. And I'm glad that we're doing this. That's the better way to put it. Not happy. I'm
Yes,
glad we're
and-
doing this because we're bringing more awareness to anybody who might be listening, that like people like yourself, and I don't want to leave you out. You're a survivor as well. What you went through, and to this day, how it still affects many people and yourself. And
just
I
like in the
sometimes
interview.
look at my own background.
Oh, I was just going to say, it kind of, and it's
Well,
it's amazing how everybody progresses or heals it progresses differently. Like how it took me 17 years to put a Christmas tree in my house, and other people
Right.
can get out, and that, I mean, because she was in it for 18 years and she was able to let go of all the teachings. It seems pretty readily. Like just one day she was following the teachings and the next day she was done. And I can't relate to that because I think for whatever reason, I was more susceptible to the brainwashing. I'm not really sure why, but I really felt like I couldn't do those things. And I didn't eat pork for a number of years as well for the same reason. So sometimes I think it just depends on what sticks with you and why. And you just have to, progress at your own rate.
Well, and again, it goes back to your childhood.
Yeah.
Those are the most important years of your life. That's when your brain is developing and your social skills and your personality is all developing. And when you're being brainwashed and what you and the survivors have gone through as children are certainly going to affect you as an adult. And
Yes.
listening to Cherie, again, 5 years later, she's now going to start taking a look at her own trauma
It sounds like
go
she's
to
just now, taking a
Yeah.
closer, taking a more serious step towards her own.
And I do
healing.
wish her the best.
Yes,
I wish her the
absolutely.
best. I really do.
And we appreciate her coming on the show.
Okay,
and
so
her story.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and don't forget, folks, she's got a Facebook group. We'll put that in the
Yes.
show notes.
Yes, the
do you
name of
remember what
that
the name is?
called. Yes, I remember the name. It's Cult Survivors from the Worldwide Church of God and their offshoots. And we
Okay.
also want to add, please go ahead and show your support by rating our show wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's Apple, Spotify, etc. Hopefully with 5 stars. Also follow us and share our podcast and continue listening to all of our latest episodes. And you can also show your support by joining us on our Facebook community as well, and that is called Cultimatum on Facebook.
Correct. And then, of course, you have your group,
Yes.
Escaping Cult and
Yes,
Recovery
Cult
Support
Escape
Group.
and Recovery Facebook support group as well. Yes, we'll add that on there as well.
All right. Well, Melody, another. I got to be careful how I choose my words, but I think it was a great episode. We got a
it
good
was
story.
very interesting,
and,
very insightful.
all right.
Okay.
Until next week. We'll
Yes,
see you
thank
then.
you.
All right.
Bye-bye.